can only use that funding to support a program that they are allowing us to use, which is the Kiva program itself. So that kind of covers both items, but this is the reason why you're seeing this item again.
Okay. Sabrina, remind the group, what was the increase of the funding?
It was originally $267,000, and now we're at around $309,000. So it includes the benefits for the 3 years for the capital access manager.
And the reason we didn't have this information before, because it needed to go through the process and to get that number, or is it just oversight?
Yeah, so it had to go through the process of HR to see if we needed to include benefits for grant employees, which is what this employee will be. It's not a typical full-time employee, so the process is a little bit different. So once we checked with HR and went to post the job, we obviously needed to come back to you guys to get the increase for the fringe benefits.
Okay. Any questions for Sabrina in regards to this side? Mr. Livingston?
Yeah, thank you. So Sabrina, so this is a permanent position or just still grant funded?
It's a grant funded position, but even though it's grant funded, we have to also include the benefits cost of that grant employee, because they'll be a full-time employee. They just will be a grant employee out of the ARPA funds instead of being out of operational funds of the cities.
And so at the end of the 3 years, they will be terminated unless we hire them, right? Is that the way it works?
That is correct. And the contract with Kiva only lasts 3 years as well. So we would have to evaluate if the program was successful in order to justify keeping on that capital access manager after the 3-year period's over.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
And just to follow up to Tom's question, is there any liability on behalf of the city if after 3 years we let this person go? Would there be any recourse for that person to?
Nope. So the grant employee signs a contract knowing that their funding is limited to if we have a grant in place. And they're always an at-will employee because they're a grant funded employee.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. All right, Mr. Livingston has moved that item. Now we'll call for the vote. All in favor, please raise your hand to signify yes. And I see everyone's nice little hands up. That is unanimous. Okay, moving on to item A2, and that's authorize Mayor Harry W. Rilling to execute any and all documents necessary for the city of Norwalk to apply, accept, and or receive the NLC Kaufman Foundation grant in the amount of $15,000. Would someone like to move that? Thank you, Ms. Shanahan. Sabrina, you're up.
Yep. So this is the partnership that I mentioned before for the Kiva program. The National League of Cities has about 19 different programs that they help administer and partner with different municipalities throughout the country. Ours is the Kiva program. And in order to support the partnership, NLC has a $15,000 grant available to us. From what I understand, it is pretty much a given. If you have signed the contract partnership with Kiva, you're automatically going to get that $15,000, but we obviously need a separate approval because the mayor needs to execute the documents, and we also have to provide them with our account information for them to deposit the funds. So we need council approval for that. So this is kind of a paired approval with the first item on the agenda.
Okay. Any questions? Mr. Kivelman?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Kites. Sabrina, is this a renewable grant every year, or is this one time in the first year?
It is a one time in the first year, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And just to backtrack a little bit, so this position will be paid with American Rescue funds for the 3 years, for the entire 3 years?
That is correct.
Okay. So no operational money will be put into this position?
Nope, no operation dollars, and any funds that we're using to match any of the Kiva loans, which we spoke about a while ago at this point, that will all be coming out of American Rescue Plan Act dollars, not any operation or capital funds.
Will this position be solely focused on Kiva, or will this person also be handling other aspects of economic and community development?
They will mostly be focused on Kiva, pending on the amount of applicants that we get to be a participant in this program, which, fingers crossed, we hope is a ton. They might have some spare time to be able to do some technical assistance for us or other Norwalk businesses that might frequent the Norwalk Business Center, or that might need some permitting help, things of that nature. But the goal is to make them fully focused on marketing the program and getting participants for the program and helping assist those folks get the actual loan applications completed and funded.
And will this position be remote or in-house?
It's going to be in-house
Okay.
for sure.
Okay. Ms. Young, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Sabrina, you said this is going to be funded through the ARPA grant?
That's correct.
So I thought it was a 2-year grant. So if we have monies that we have not expended by the deadline, how is that going to work? Who is that with all the noise?
I'm sorry, I'm in an airport.
Oh, okay.
I'm on my way to my bachelorette, but I'm with you guys first. So.
Oh boy, dedication.
So the way the ARPA dollars work, we have to have contracts in place and plans to expend the funds by December 2024, but we have until December 2026 to actually expend those funds.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions? No. Okay. I believe Mr. Livingston did move this item, if that memory serves me correctly. Yes. Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand to signify yes. All the hands are up, and it passes unanimously. Okay. Next up, more of a discussion item and presentation is the economic outlook and review and presentation. Several of you and I thought it was a great idea to kind of get an overview of what's going on here in Norwalk as far as economic outlook. Kind of like a broad stroke, either it be leasing, businesses, movement, so forth, COVID, how that's affected our city. So Sabrina has prepared some information for us. I know you're I know you're at an airport right now, but please do your best to kind of give us an overview of what you came up with, please.
I will. Give me a second. I'm going to attempt to share my screen, which it looks like it's working.
And Sabrina, I know Mr. Kleppman had something to add, but he's currently in the planning and zoning meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, so he's currently in the planning and zoning meeting. I have spoken to him about his couple of slides that are at the end of the presentation, but if you guys have any additional questions that I can't answer, he's going to jump on at the end of the meeting. So he should be able to answer the questions that I might not have been able to answer.
Great.
All right. So sorry, this is a little wonky. I'm on the iPad, but you guys can see this, right?
Yes, we can.
All right. So we're going to take an overall economic outlook at the city of Norwalk. We'll start with some new census data. As a majority of you know, the census was completed in 2020. So during the middle of a pandemic, not the best necessary time for one. But we have a bunch of new data that we haven't really consolidated and looked at in a while. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that. Population, income, employment, and then we're going to jump into leasing activity from a commercial perspective and also look at some separate markets in that realm. And then last but not least is really getting into Steve's nitty gritty, which is any new developments that are happening at this point in time that you will see pull a construction permit probably in the near future. Some things that you might see not pull a construction permit, but you might hear about. And then lastly, the planning initiatives that they're going through. And then obviously I'll be on to answer questions that you guys might have following the presentation, because I'm going to throw a lot of information at you, including a lot of data points. So bear with me. So first off, I compared the 2010 to 2015 to 2020 population data. So the 91,184 people that we're on right now, that was from the census 2020 data. So we're expecting that this number is a little underrepresented. Number one, because we had lower completion amounts of this census because of COVID. The door-to-door people who would come and help you fill out a survey, it was a lot harder to do during a pandemic. And also this isn't capturing the migration of New Yorkers or what have you to the city that we might have missed during that initial time period when the census data was being collected. So as you can see, we're growing at a steady rate, and we have been since 2010. Our population increased by 6.5%, which was the 7th highest in the state of Connecticut, obviously behind some of the larger municipalities such as Hartford, Bridgeport, Stamford, and the like. So that's just a basic general outlook about our population right now. So next we'll move on to the race composition. So as you will see, in 2010, our majority, and still our majority, is white non-Hispanic individuals. But in 2020, we shifted that a lot. So the white alone population significantly declined, and so did the Black alone populations. However, everything else basically significantly increased. And if you look at the other graph on here, you will see that the Hispanic population is not significantly increasing every year, but it's consistently increasing every year. And this is important when we talk about kind of our school systems and the diversity of Norwalk. We're actually getting more diverse at this point in time, which is what we harp ourselves on, right? That's what Norwalk is great for. So we're really diversifying every single year, and that's a consistent trend that we're seeing from 2010 to now. When we look at our income, we compared this to the median household income, so how much money a family is making versus the per capita income, which is per person. So as you can see, the median household income is very high and it has increased over the years since 2010. So right now we're at about 90,000, and our per capita income, so what a sole person is making, is around $50,000. So you'll see our per capita income is pretty stagnant. The line looks pretty flat, but our median income for a household is increasing. So this most likely means that household sizes are getting larger. So we're roommating, or we're having more children, things like that. Or the people that are physically within the household are aging. So you'll have a family of 4. Those 2 children have aged into a working age, and now they're contributing to that household income because they haven't yet moved out of their parents' home. So that's kind of the telltale sign of something like that happening. So we have, significantly high income, and we also have a high per capita income compared to the nation and compared to Connecticut. However, those are important facts when we're starting to talk about rent and things of that nature.
Sabrina, I don't know if I can interrupt now.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you talk about this growth of income, do we have any comparison to the state as a whole?
So the state is, I don't have that information on me, but I do know that we're a smidge higher than they are on a per capita basis. But their trend from 2010 to 2020 is pretty much the same as ours. It's pretty stagnant.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. And if anybody wants to jump in on anything and not wait till the end, feel free to. So next I'll jump into educational attainment, which is one of the main sticking points for a lot of companies and new businesses to move to Norwalk. So as you can see, compared to the state, we have a significantly higher amount of individuals that are 18 or older who have a bachelor's degree or higher. So we have one of the most highly educated workforces in the state, which is something that larger companies look for when they're moving to municipality, is their access to talent. So if they have a high education base in your specific municipality, chances are you have a highly talented workforce, which will translate into full-time employees that will be able to work for that significant firm. And we have had this over time. You'll see 2010, we were significantly higher. 2015, we closed the gap a little bit compared to the state. And then 2019, we're going back up again. Chances are in 2015, the reason why it's a little bit lower is that the data source had a different transition value. So it might have a little bit more flexibility in going up or down from that number, as most data points do. So you could probably look at that as not these amount of people moving out of Norwalk per se. It's probably just a data error when it was collected. Next is employment rates. So it's kind of hard to see on this graph. However, we're pretty much lined up with our larger LMA, so our market area, which is Bridgeport, Stamford, and Norwalk, and we're pretty on par with Connecticut as well. Right now, we are lower. So this is current as of last month. So right now, we're lower than both our LMA and the state, which is a trend you'll see going throughout the years. We're usually a decimal point or two lower when it comes to unemployment than other municipalities in our LMA and the state. So we're doing really well. You're seeing this bounce back from 2020 when we had massive layoffs due to the coronavirus. So it shows that our employment and our economy is recovering at a slow rate, but it's recovering, which is really great to see.
Sabrina, before you move any further, do you have any statistics on age, average, age and age brackets and so forth for the city?
So I don't have this in my presentation, but I do know preliminarily that our median age has gone down. I can't tell you the exact numbers, but I'm happy to give you that information. But we're getting younger as a city.
I mean, wouldn't that affect the numbers for, like, let's say, household income and so forth? You've got people in the workforce not on fixed retirement income.
Yes. So if you have a median household income and somebody is retired, and that income for a household would go down, but we're seeing it go up. So you would have more working age individuals within the municipality than previously.
Okay. I'd be interested in finding, if you have any information specific to age, I'd be interested.
Yeah. So the census data breaks it down by age group. So I'm happy to send it to you and break it down like I did on these charts, just break it down that way by the different years to show the change.
Thank you.
Right. So this is kind of getting more into the more hyper local business climate that we're dealing with right now. So this is our fit up permits, our tenant fit up permits for commercial space throughout the city of Norwalk. So you can see in 2018, we were at 123, 2019, we were at 187. So this is when you're seeing a lot of the mall permits come in. So that's why that number seems significantly higher than some of the other bars that I'm showing. 101 for 2020, that's during the pandemic, but you can see 2021 and currently we're rebounding from that. So we have 131 permits in 2021, and then we're projecting about 140 permits in 2022. Right now we only have about 12, but it's also a time of year where you're not seeing significant permits pulled because of the weather, the market, the climate, all of these different things going on, but we're projecting about 140 by the end of the year this year. And this, I should mention that this runs on a calendar year and not a fiscal year. So this is numbers just basically from January and half of February in this 2022 bucket. So I did mention, yep, go ahead.
Can you give us some examples of the types of businesses we're seeing?
Sure. So there's a variety of them, which is really exciting. We have a significant amount of food-related businesses, and that's not necessarily restaurants, that's food manufacturing businesses as well. We have a significant number of boutique manufacturers that are making things like soap, ice cream, hand lotion, those types of things. We also have a significant amount of artisan businesses that are starting up in textiles and 3D printing, some of those creative economy type of businesses that are really exciting. When we're talking about larger increases of jobs, though, we're seeing an increase in kind of the startup tech industry and in the marketing industry. So data engineers and kind of designers, things like that. Those are the jobs that are really coming out in large droves. But that's kind of it runs the gamut. There's tons of new businesses all the time, which is really exciting. But we're also seeing a large number of entrepreneurs as well, which is good news because that's how we kind of home grow our own businesses within the city of Norwalk. So I hope that answers your question. And if you wanted me to provide some data that breaks down kind of what new firms are starting up, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
And Sabrina, it would be interesting to know, they sound like small startups, how many employers they have. So if you could provide that too,
Yes.
on average.
So I can talk to that. On average, we're seeing right now around an average of probably around 20 in the 25 to 50 range for your startup companies. But when we're talking about the smaller boutique manufacturers, the largest I've seen is 13 and the smallest I've seen is 4. So it runs the gamut, and it really depends on where they are in their business. Like, have they just started out? If they just started out, there's only a couple of them.
Yeah.
And if
Can you keep that sideways, Sabrina? Because it's
Oh,
much
sorry.
clearer. Yeah, that's no, what I mean, yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. So yeah, they run the gamut of the size of employees. When you're talking about startups, you're in a higher employee count range. Same thing with those marketing type firms. Those are higher employee count ranges. But when you're talking about these boutique manufacturers and these artisans, you're looking at between like 5 to 10 employees compared to like a 25 to 50 employee.
So Darlene, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Darlene, excuse me, Sabrina, I get that fit up permits is a good way to, track, startups and new businesses. Are there any other ways that, would give us a more accurate idea, or combining two separate outlets for finding this information? Like, I don't know, I'm just thinking outside the box, like LLC formations, corporation formations, things along those lines, because not everyone's gonna have a fit up permit.
Yeah, so we can track that via trade name certificates, but the only issue with that is that somebody can register for a trade name certificate at any time. Technically, they should do it when they start their business, but a lot of times they do it after the fact. So you'll get businesses that are in that grouping that maybe started, 3 years ago and is just now filling out a trade name certificate, sorry. But I can provide those numbers as well. That's through the town clerk's office, and they regularly track those numbers. It's also in the mayor's dashboard. But like I said, according to the mayor's dashboard and trade name certificates, we're at about 320 new business formations since the start of the fiscal year. But again, that could include some businesses that have been established in previous years that just haven't filed a trade name certificate.
Well, I mean, can we take it a step further? Because I know this is all public information with the state, with formations of corporations, S corps, LLCs, and so forth. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud where, we have a lot of people working from home now, starting up their companies based out of their home. I mean, is there some sort of database we can look at for formations, not just trade names, but like I said, corporations, LLCs, and so forth? I mean,
so we don't track that locally, but the state does, because that's who they have to register their business name with and all that fun stuff. So I can ask them for that. I'm sure they have it somewhere accessible and in a list form for us, especially if we're just getting like a sole number. I'm sure they would be happy to share it with me. Again, it's all public information. So I just have to make the ask, but that's probably the most accurate way to see how many new businesses, quote unquote, whether at home or non-at-home businesses, are being formed.
Right. I mean, I think the more data and information we can compile, the more accurate our numbers will be. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Just one comment on that. I mean, people could set up corporations in their home, but they may not operate out of their home. They may operate someplace else. So I think it's good information, but we just have to bear that in mind.
Yeah, it's really tricky to get super hyper accurate when it comes to tracking business formations because of all the inconsistencies that we all just mentioned. But we can get a pretty good picture. All right. Are we good to move on?
Actually, no, Sabrina, this is David Hughelman. I have a quick question. Are we able to track current businesses with, hiring or layoffs, growth of the businesses that are currently in the city?
No, we are not. They don't have to report employee information to the municipality. Again, the state does track that in some regard because they have to claim their employees via their taxes. but we don't have availability of that data. But again, I can ask. I can always ask.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. So this is more of a generalized look at commercial leasing activity in our labor market area. So that's comparing, we're grouped in with Bridgeport, Stamford, and ourselves, Norwalk, as well as Danbury. So our real estate market is weaker compared to the overall US in the commercial sense. But as you'll see, as we go down the list, we're stronger in most of the categories that are not commercial related. So our apartment property market value is stronger than nationally. Our office property market is stronger than nationally. Our industrial property market is stronger than nationally. Our retail market is weaker than nationally. However, those numbers are very weak nationally as well as here locally. And our hotel and lodging property market is stronger than nationally. So this is really showing the rebound from COVID and the effects of COVID on Norwalk and specifically on our labor market area. So our apartment and residential properties are very hot right now. So there's very little room to move around. There's high demand, which is leading to increased prices, both of single family homes and of rent values. Our office property market is stronger, specifically in Norwalk. We'll get into on the next slide. It's a little bit weaker than our surrounding municipalities. However, we have some new larger companies that are coming in that will increase that percentage amount compared to some of the other municipalities. And I'll get into that again on the next slide. So the multifamily, industrial, and retail property markets are going to continue to recover more quickly than our office market. And that's a national trend. So we're getting more residents in more than we are companies at this point in time. And that is mainly due to COVID-19 and remote and teleworking that are now decreasing the demand of office space that's needed to run a company.
Sabrina, you made mention of, our commercial real estate. Like, for instance, well, maybe this is a Steve Kleppen question, but like, how are we doing, let's say, at our office parks, such as Merit 7, some of our other, larger office parks? Are we, what's occupancy look like for those?
So the occupancy is a little difficult to tell. A lot of times it's because we're having rotating workers. So a lot of the companies that had leases pre-COVID that haven't expired have not decreased the amount of space that they actually have in their lease, but they have started to sublet some of that property. Their occupancy rate, I would have to ask, but we really only have Merit 7 and 50 Washington Street that we can look at, which I get to in a little bit in the next slide. But it's hard to tell. They know their occupancy, and it seems like their occupancy is a little bit lower than pre-COVID, but not significantly. And that's just because you're not seeing these leases expire yet. So you're seeing higher numbers of subletting rather than decreased occupancy. So yes, nobody's physically in the space, but still it's accounted for, if that makes sense.
So it means your prediction that as soon as these leases do expire, that we're going to see a higher vacancy rate in our larger office parks?
So it's tough to tell because we are seeing new companies move in that are taking up office space. So will there be a decrease in kind of large demand for, 20,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet of office space? Probably yes. But when we're talking about these smaller footprinted office spaces, those will probably be in higher demand. So I wouldn't say that the vacancy is going to spike and increase significantly, but I do think that we're going to see some smaller transactions go on rather than, these large heavy hitters that are taking up tens of thousands of square feet.
Like, how involved is your department with communicating with these property owners? I mean, is there any support for them? Any collaborations?
Yeah. So when any company reaches out to me, or I have a company that I've specifically reached out to that is coming to the city. I essentially send out a mass email to most of the larger property owners that tell me if there's a space that might work or not work for them. So that's kind of how that partnership has worked. Choice Peterson kind of keeps all of the folks like me, not only in Norwalk, but in Stamford, Westport, et cetera, about the leasing rates. So we have that data regularly available to us, but when it comes to actually doing a pipeline placement, so company comes to us, we say, okay, we want you to move here. Here's all the great stuff about Norwalk. And then we shoot an email out saying, you know, there's this company who's looking for 20,000 square feet. They need X amount of parking. This is what they're looking for via a neighborhood if they want to be in South Norwalk or otherwise. And then from there, they'll respond and say if essentially they have space available that fits what the client wants.
Great. Thank you.
No problem.
Sabrina?
Yep.
So you said our retail property market is weaker. Do you foresee that changing? Because there are quite a few empty that I can see retail spaces, storefront, I guess you would call them, on the bottom level, ground floor spaces.
Yeah, so this was a trend that was happening pre-COVID in the, you know, age of Amazon and online shopping and all that fun stuff. So we did see this trend happening pre-COVID, but post-COVID, obviously it's getting more intense because less people were out to physically open a new business and physically open a storefront, which has a lot more cost associated with it. However, because we're updating our zoning to be a little bit more flexible on the ground floor, for us specifically as a municipality, if we zone correctly, I do not think we'll see as much vacancy as we're seeing now, because you can outfit a space that's not necessarily for a retailer or a restaurant. It could be for a boutique manufacturer, a girl who's making soap and candles in the back of her store. Those types of things will end up starting to fill the retail space. So not your traditional kind of commercial business. So if we plan correctly, I don't think the vacancy will stay the way it is.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. I can move on. So this is what I was talking about, more hyper-focused on Norwalk and not our labor market area. So our Class A office space has increased to 38.3%. So John, this goes to your point. These are the Merit 7s, the 50 Washington Street, the Connecticut Avenue office buildings. So that's kind of where we're at, which has been the highest that we've seen ever. However, we had 10 of these office buildings had a decrease in available square footage. So they're actually leasing out space. It's just in smaller amounts than previously. So 201, 301, and 401 Merit 7. So all of the Merit 1 buildings have 157,000 square feet available. And 801 Main Ave and 20 Glover combined have leased 90,000 square feet. So you're seeing movement and you're seeing high vacancy rates. And again, this is a national trend. This is not unique to us. This is due to the teleworking kind of environment that we're in a post-COVID world. However, I will say that we have 3 major office permits that were pulled in the last week. So that's not going to be reflected in this data, obviously.
Do we ever get more in the weeds and look at the MSRP and see that, you know, what's available out there in the Class A availability? Because I know, I mean,
we know the availability, but the pricing differs significantly when you're talking about a Merit 7 space versus a 50 Washington Street space versus a space on Wall Street, for example, which technically is a Class B, not a Class A office space. So at Merit 7, it depends on your lease term as well. So these numbers can range, but you're in and around $30 a square foot. And that kind of holds true for 50 Washington as well. But again, it depends on your lease term. And if you sign a longer lease, your per square foot is going to be less, but you're in and around $30 for Class A office space.
Sounds good.
All right. So moving on, we're jumping back kind of to a housing focus as we're getting more into Steve's information. So as you'll see, since 2010, the number of renter occupied units and owner occupied units is beginning to even out over time. So we're 3,000 units in between of being an exact 50-50 split of renter owner at this point in time. And a question that you might ask is, why is the 2010 number of units significantly less than the 2015? Significantly more, than the 2015 and the 2019 numbers of units. And that could be for a variety of things. Housing turnover, data collection, and also replacement of units. So you have something that's older, took up more space, you now took up less space, but now you're replacing it with a newer, more spacious kind of development. That would show that type of change. But we are still a majority an owner occupied city, but we are trending in getting a more renter focused city. So you'll see 2010, our housing units are in and around the same as we are now. I know on the graph it looks significant, but in reality, it's only 2,500 units in a 10-year time span. So the number of overall housing units has gone up since 2010, but the vacancy rates, however, we should note, is at historic lows. So what's happening is there's an increased demand for housing, but also there's an increased demand of different types of housing. So we have renter and owner, but renter can mean, it can mean an apartment, it can mean renting a condo, it can mean renting a 2-family home, all of these different types of things. But when you have such low vacancy rates, you have trouble moving around within the housing market. So if somebody wanted to leave an apartment and go, say, into a 2-family home or rent a full home, it's very hard for them to do that because of the availability of those types of properties. And same thing vice versa. So if somebody wanted to sell their house and move into a rental unit, it's very hard for them to do that as well because the vacancy rates overall, single family and renter and multifamily in general are very, very low. So it's very hard to move in and within, let alone move in and out of the city. So the demand for housing and different types of that housing is high.
So Sabrina, you're saying this, if I'm reading this right, roughly 3,000 units have been added between 2010 and 2020?
Yes, that is
and
correct.
that includes apartments, 1-bedrooms, I mean, just everything combined?
Yep, it's every single housing unit. So it's multifamily, it's single family, and everything in between.
So Sabrina, I'm looking at this table and maybe I'm not reading it right. So if you slide it down a little bit so you can see the top chart. So if I'm looking at the number of units in 2010 in this top chart, it's more than 2019. But if I look at this housing units below, 2010 is less than, is this? It looks like, I don't know, I'm confused because the
2019 10-year numbers are from ACS data, and there's 2020 numbers in the other chart.
Yeah, but it's just, but I guess if I look at 2010 above, we have more housing units in 2010 than 2019. Right?
Correct.
But here and below it says we have less by 2,500 less. How do I reconcile that?
What do you mean you have 2,500 less?
Well, if I look at housing units in 2010, I didn't do the math.
Yep.
It's about 40,000 in 2010. Down below in the other chart, it says about 35,400. So you're off by a few thousand there. Then in 2019, up of housing tenure, you're down about 33,000, but in your chart below, you're 38,000 a year later.
Yeah, so that's due to using ACS data in the first chart and regular census data in the second one. So the census data is traditionally more accurate than the ACS data because the ACS surveys are estimates based on traditional increase. So that 2019 number was calculated off of a percentage increase that is averaged out over a variety number of years. But the 2020 numbers that you're seeing are physical results of a survey. So they went out and counted, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 housing units instead of using a formula to say how many housing units they estimate that there are.
So Sabrina, do you feel like the trend is accurate with the other numbers? I mean, because there is
I would say the trend is accurate. But our housing units, again, on this graph, it looks kind of skewed because the amount of change is really only 2,500 units. But in reality, on the graph, it doesn't look like that. And that's my bad. But yeah, I would think the trend is accurate. If you looked on like a Zillow data, for example, the more frequently pulled reports, you'll see that the transactions that are happening between single family and multifamily, so renter versus owner occupied, you're looking about almost an even split. And you are seeing a consistent increase of housing units over time in the city as a whole. Sorry, does that answer your question? So this is more in the nitty gritty of the housing market activity itself between neighborhoods. So you'll see on the side of the screen, the list of neighborhoods in Norwalk. So you have East Norwalk, West Norwalk, etc. Next to that, you'll see the median listing home price. So this is what the owners are physically listing on like a Zillow or in the real estate market. This is what they're going out to start with. And then the price per square foot and how many have been sold, how many are for sale and how many are for rent at this point in time. So the median listing home price in Norwalk is right now $550,000. Well, right now as in January 22, the most recent we can get the data. And that is trending up over time. And this is due to COVID-19, essentially. So our housing market in the single family realm and in the multifamily realm has been up 10.1% year over year. So per square foot, you're looking at $325 per square foot for a housing unit. In the past week, single family homes in Norwalk sold on average for $750,000. So that's the city overall. If you wanted to get more into detail, you can see, in a place like Rowayton, you're looking at 1.7 million, but when you're looking at kind of a Spring Hill area or East Norwalk area, you're looking at about half that, maybe even less. And now we're getting into Steve stuff, which I will do my best to present it to you as best as I can. So Steve started out with presenting where we can see the majority of growth happening in the city of Norwalk in the coming years. So the first area is East Norwalk. As we've seen some results of that already, we have the new apartment developments along the train station, a lot of transit-oriented development focused. New establishments coming in the city. This is also going to be a direct result, not of COVID, but of our regulations and our planning that we've done in the city. Once we've correctly planned for an area and the zoning becomes very clear of what you can and cannot do, you might see a little bit of spur of growth in those specific areas. South Norwalk, again, it's readily evident around the train stations as well, super significantly, as well as throughout different neighborhoods in South Norwalk, as we've seen over the past couple of years, especially in the last kind of 5 to 10 years. The Wall Street West Avenue area, again, we have a few developments that have been proposed and are underway in that specific geography. This culminates basically 95 north up to Route 1, using the river as a barrier and the connector as the other barrier for that specific geography. Merritt 7 and Glover, as we know, there's the BLT development that's going on there right now. They have a proposal of additional units. that have been presented to the Planning and Zoning Committee, but have not been submitted for formal proposals at this time. But significant growth again around a transit station. As I'm sure you've heard, the Merit 7 train station will now run direct access to Grand Central on a reoccurring basis. And they're specifically doing improvements to that station to make it more accessible, not only for the folks at Merit 7, but the folks that are within that neighborhood. And last but not least, the Route 1 corridor. So this is on Connecticut Ave. As I'm sure a lot of you have heard the news at this point that Wegmans is going in on Route 1. And we also have some apartment developments and mixed use developments that have been going up over there in the past few months and over the past year. So those are the significant growth areas. And I'm sure Steve has more to say about that. But if you have questions, I'm happy to try to address them. And in the next few slides, we're going to go over specific developments that you'll see a kind of a shovel in the ground in the next few months and other projects that you might see coming forward.
Sabrina?
Yep.
Do you know the number of apartments that's over on Glover Avenue? What's been done and what's to come and what that total will look like?
So the total is around 2,500 units. I don't know how many have been developed at this point. That would be a more significant question for Steve, but I know the total amount is an addition of 2,500 units.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, so these are the two projects that will have a groundbreaking that we know of in 2022. So Pinnacle will move this year. And we were actually expecting to have an application in place. And well, we have an application in place. We're expecting to have a construction demo permit pulled actually this past week, but it didn't come in yet. But shortly it will. So we have 393 residential units and 40 of those are going to be affordable. And then we have an additional 26,000 square feet of commercial space that will be on the ground floor. And this is right adjacent to the Waypoint developments that will be completed by Toll Brothers. So that's the first project. And if anybody has questions, I will try to answer them.
Well, I guess my question is it really going to happen?
Yeah, so all their plans are submitted and approved. We're really just waiting for that demo permit to be pulled. And like I said, Steve was expecting it and still is expecting it. So it will come soon.
That's great. Wow, long time coming.
Yes, exactly. And then 10 Monroe Street as well. This has already been through the process. Again, we're just waiting on a demo permit. 150 residential units, 15 of those affordable, and that's due to the 10% requirement that the city requires in their zoning, and an additional 16,000 square feet of commercial space. That commercial space does have a tenant that will be moving into that space that my office helped facilitate. I'm not sure if they want it to be publicly known, but there is a tenant that will be in that space. So that's great news when we have a new development where we have a tenant that's already lined up. So if anybody has any questions on that, again, happy to try to answer them.
Well,
Tom has his hand up.
Mr. Keegan?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sabrina, all these development, and it's all being presented in a very positive way. 2,000 or 2,500 apartments up on Glover Avenue and 393 at 467 West Avenue, 150 on Monroe Street. Does the city have a goal in mind as to how many people, what the population would be optimal for the city?
I am not equipped to answer that question. Steve might have a better answer for you. I know that we don't have a set number in mind that we go by, but Steve would probably be better to answer kind of what we would be looking at from a future planning perspective. But a lot of our zoning changes are going to dictate actually how much build out we can physically accommodate. And developers do have to take into consideration draw on resources, draw on sewer, water, those types of things as well. So there are constraints in place that are just naturally occurring, but do we have a number that we specifically say we're going to have 20,000 more and that's it? No, we don't. But again, Steve can probably answer that question better than I can. So if you want to save it till he's here, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Are we good to move on? I think the last slide is just anticipated projects that we're going to be probably seeing in the near future. South Norwalk, again, that TOD development, so the transit-oriented development around Monroe and Chestnut Street. That's a lot of spinnaker development that's occurring over there. East Norwalk, we also have that Wells Fargo site, as I'm sure, again, that you have heard. Wells Fargo is currently moving out of that spot. They will only have one location in West Norwalk, on West Avenue. That will be their sole branch in Norwalk at the end of this year. They're currently only operating at that branch, and there's also an additional one on Connecticut Ave. Yep, there's additional one on Connecticut Ave, but the branch that there is going to be their main flagship is really going to be that West Avenue branch. And lastly, again, as we mentioned before, Westport Avenue and Connecticut Avenue, as you've seen, there's been development on both of those streets. So Connecticut Avenue, we have new apartments that are across the street from the Lowe's. We have the Wegmans that's going to be coming in. And then on Westport Ave, we have apartments that are in the rear of kind of that Petco building. And we also had that storage facility as well. So those will be some new and reoccurring developments that you'll probably see in the near future that we've heard of, but they have not submitted yet. So these are not things that you'll see in a shovel in the ground anytime soon. They still have to go through the process, significant public process, significant legal processes before we're actually going to see any development on these specific sites.
Sabrina, do you have the total numbers for the Westport Avenue and the Connecticut Avenue?
I do not. Steve will have those numbers though. Yeah.
So Sabrina, you have potential developers in mind that you anticipate filing applications, or you're just saying these are available spots?
Nope, there's specific developers that have gauged interest on these specific sites.
All right, thank you.
Yep. All righty, and then last but not least is really a holistic approach of what Steve's office is doing. And a lot of you are participants in these processes, as is myself. So we have the industrial zone study going on, which is almost in its final stages. So you will be seeing that in May, which will be accompanying a POCD kind of addition, because what happens is after the plan's complete, you amend the POCD to include that new plan because it's a more specific kind of look at a specific area of the city. And part of that industrial zone study spurred the industrial zones waterfront study, where we're taking a significant look specifically at the waterfront. That study is currently going out for public comment. The draft plan will probably come in the spring, early summertime. And that's when we would then see some changes from that plan either be amended into the current industrial zone study, but also into our new zoning regulations, which is happening simultaneously. So we'll have a public draft of the zoning regulations completed in spring, and late summer will probably be significant amounts of edits. We do internally expect to go through staff relatively soon on a first draft. After they get comments from us is when it will go out to the public, once it's in kind of a more finalized form. And then last but not least, with the American Rescue Plan Act dollars, there is a line item for an affordable housing plan. This is now required via state statute. So a lot of the questions that a lot of you broached and asked tonight will be answered in that plan. So it'll look at the market of affordable housing, of non-affordable housing, and kind of look compared to the incomes of the city and individuals in the city where that gap is from a market perspective and what the actual demand is for affordable housing and at what income levels. So that RFP is pending. It's currently with purchasing. We would expect probably in the next month or two that we've released that RFP, and then an approval of a consultant would probably come to you guys in late spring, early summer.
Any questions? Mr. Livingston.
I don't have a question as much as I want to thank you and Sabrina for putting this presentation on. I think this is really, really helpful and good. And John, I really appreciate it. I think it's great you brought this forward. I like to see it again. There's so much information, really helpful. We haven't had it before. I really think it's great.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I think maybe perhaps in the summer sometime, July, August, something like that, we'll revisit it, Sabrina, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And I'm happy to do it more often. And also you can expect in around June, a more specific update on my projects that business development and tourism has been working on, because we're going to do kind of a fiscal year end of economic and community development. So you guys will see kind of the culmination of all the projects that we've completed in this past fiscal year and what you can look forward to next year. So I'm happy to do it on a more regular basis. And also kind of include the local initiatives that we're doing that you guys might have heard of, but don't necessarily get involved with.
Great. Yeah, put it, if you make a note, please, this summer, let's revisit.
Sure, definitely.
And our plan to, when Steve gets on the call, we'll get through all this. And then if we have any questions for Steve, we'll ask him when he gets on the call after we've gotten to the agenda. All right, if there's no other questions, I
just want to say thank you to Sabrina, and be safe and have fun though while you're out there. Okay?
Yes, I'm on my way to New Orleans
home,
now.
right?
New Orleans, oh my God.
Oh boy.
We're going to New Orleans.
That's a great place
Nice.
for a bachelorette. That's where
Be
my daughter
safe.
went for hers.
Bye. Be safe.
Thank you guys. Have a great rest of your meeting, and I'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Bye.
Okay, moving on. Item 2B1. We've got Mr. Bedoli with us today, and I see that we have many of our gracious redevelopment agency members with us tonight, and thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry I made you wait for to get to the item that you're here for, but we're almost there. And so, Mr. Bedoli, if you don't mind starting the discussion on the Cdb funding. And before I actually do that, I want to thank everyone for getting Brian and myself your requests. And I think Brian and his team have done a great job of accommodating all your top requests. But Brian will get into that a little bit more detail. So, Brian.
All right, thank you, Chairman, and good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Just wanted to follow up to an email I'd sent probably about 3 weeks ago. Following up, we had the presentations from the CDBG applicants at the last planning committee, economic and community development meeting. We were fortunate to be able to accommodate everyone's top request. As you recall, we had about $617,000 of requests for $136,000 of funding. So I know it was very tough, but we're fortunate to be able to accommodate all the top one requests with a 16% reduction. Based on the type of the services we received, we expect organizations will still be able to deliver these programs that they apply for despite the minor reduction. And also, we have a reasonable expectation that we may receive additional CDBG funds. Nothing has been finalized with our grant agreements or the city's grant agreement until the money is actually appropriated. But the sort of general consensus is that we can expect a little more, and hopefully we'll be able to make these projects whole. So I just wanted to provide you a general update. The next step on this is that we're going to be compiling the annual action plan for consideration and potential adoption at the next planning committee meeting. So I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have on that item.
So the plan is to have the action plan and the vote for the nonprofits receiving the allocations. So any questions or comments, or is everyone okay with that? Okay, great, perfect. So we'll be dealing with that at our next meeting. Okay, moving on. Item C, what many of us are here for, that's Webster Street lot update. Brian?
Yes, I just wanted to provide a brief update to you all. As you'll recall, we had distributed a request for qualifications for a preferred developer for the Webster Street lot, recognizing the 5-acre city-owned municipal parking lot as a surface lot and seeing what sort of interest and appetite there may be in the market for redevelopment of that site. The first stage was a request for qualifications. We received bids from 7 firms. We've gone through working with city staff to select a short list of those firms the intent is to invite them to a request for proposals. We received a number of, interesting concepts that we sort of looked at preliminarily. Obviously, it's very high level at this stage. There's still a lot of discussions that need to occur and just general community engagement that would occur for this project. But we were really encouraged to see that much developer interest in the site. Obviously recognizing its proximity to the train station and some of the data that's obviously in the market that Sabrina just went over is attractive to the development community. So what we're in the process now is we've actually identified 3 firms that we'd like to move to the RFP stage. I'm going to reserve the name just because we're in the middle of a procurement here, but we're in the process of drafting that RFP. I definitely wanted to provide you an update on that. We intend to hopefully issue it this month to those firms. We're concurrently obtaining an appraisal on the site, so we kind of know what we're working with in terms of the property value, and then starting to structure the evaluation criteria, which we'll be working in close concert with you all as we sort of start getting more detailed information on the site. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, Brian, seeing there are no questions, you want to move on to item 2, the Sono TOD plan presentation?
Yeah, of course. And this item, we are fortunate to be able to invite our RDA board so we could have a joint presentation, hopefully benefit from all your questions and comments so we could kind of, talk it out as a group. We have invited our consultant, VHB, who will be driving the presentation today, providing you an update on where we're at and where we're going. We're approaching the end of the planning study. We plan to have a draft report out for public comment and all of your consideration this month. And I will give it to VHB, who can provide details on the overall project and where we're at.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ken Schwartz with VHB. I must say that following up on Sabrina's, she set a pretty high bar for us, but we're going to walk you through about a year's worth of our work. We've been working with Brian and his staff on the South Norwalk Station area study. And why don't we go to the next slide? So we're going to give you a brief overview of the project itself. There's been extensive community input that we've received throughout the study. We're going to highlight some of that input that we received and how it's reflected in the plan. We're joined tonight by Eric Halverson from RKG Associates, who conducted the market analysis, and we'll give an overview of that specific to the South Norwalk area. My colleague, Michael Goldenberg, will give the highlights of the transitway and the various options that we looked at for the bus transit and the connections to the train station. I'll give an overview of the future build out of the plan itself, and then Joe Balskis from VHB will highlight the results of our transportation and mobility analysis. So the plan itself has a lot of sort of goals and specific components to it. First and foremost is around the transportation infrastructure, looking at ways to integrate both the bus, the walking, bike integration, and with the rail station itself. Looking at the land use and development of public property, specifically on the west side of the station, where there is significant land that's under public ownership. There's a very strong affordable housing component to the plan. We also addressed, and you'll see and Joe will walk through this, the complete streets and roadway streetscape enhancements, a very concerted effort around neighborhood connectivity and preservation, specifically on the east side of the station. And then looking at opportunities for additional green space and parks, which was something that came up during the community discussions that we had. The plan itself has a lot of goals, and the plan, as Brian likes to say, is a series of trade-offs and identifying what those might be going forward. You know, from improving neighborhood connections, the affordable housing component, looking at filling in empty and underutilized lots, identifying the future build-out potential of the specific development sites around the station itself. And the plan itself really does build off of the city's plan of conservation and development, which specifically called out and had recommendations for development around the train station itself. So this is our study area. The train station itself, highlighted in number 1 with the commuter parking lot and the parking garage and the station itself. The Chestnut Street block number 2, and on the east side also the Lexington Avenue area. And then on the west side, 2 specific opportunities for development: the SNU site, which would involve the relocation of the SNU facility, and the Housing Authority site number 6. And you'll see in our development concepts opportunities that were explored for development in on those specific sites themselves. So in terms of the transformative opportunity, you know, I think the real sort of takeaway for us was the land that's in public ownership around the station, and that's identified in the blue. On the east side, there's about 3 acres highlighted in blue that's under public ownership, and on the west side is about a little over 5 acres of land that's under public ownership. So there's about 8.25 acres of land that's under public ownership in immediate proximity to the station itself, which is really a transformative and unique opportunity for Norwalk. At the same time, we need to balance future development with the community needs and the community desires for the South Norwalk neighborhood area, looking at opportunities to improve transit, improve the street infrastructure, and focusing on things like equity and affordable housing, historic preservation, sustainability, and complete streets. So from a historic and neighborhood preservation, and this was near and dear to the community when we met with them, is while we're looking to encourage mixed-use infill development around the station, we need to be mindful of protecting the residential neighborhoods from future development, protecting the historic building context around the station, and really looking at concentrating the higher density development within a quarter mile of the train station itself. So as I alluded to earlier, extensive community engagement, a highly iterative process. There was a community advisory committee that we met with a number of times over the past year. There was also a technical advisory committee that we met with. We undertook a community-wide survey that we got some really valuable and good input. And then we had a series of public meetings as well. So this all reflected, you know, input, comments that we received that I think are reflected in the final plan that we're going to be sharing with you tonight. So just to highlight some of the community input that we got, we conducted a community walking tour with the community in September of last year. Key takeaways and comments that we received was a real desire for affordable housing ownership and pathways for affordable housing ownership. And Eric Halverson will address that specifically during his presentation. Looking at community-oriented commercial uses came up, streetscape enhancements, in terms of just additional green space, tree plantings, sidewalk enhancements, a concern about traffic impacts and what future development means from a traffic standpoint, and then looking at opportunities and options for where the transitway should be located, whether it's on the east side or the west side of the station itself. And we walked the streets, we walked the area around the station with the community. These are just some of the photographs that we took while we were out with the community of the specific areas that were identified, whether it be the underpasses at Franklin Street, the bus activity at the station, the intersections of the MLK Drive with Monroe Street, Henry Street. These were all elements of the and areas around the station that were highlighted and discussed with the community. Next slide. So we have then received additional community input from District B, highlighting things like community amenities, street lighting, tree plantings, open space enhancements, support for local service organizations like the YMCA and shelters, preserving the quality of adjacent development, Columbus Court, and again, home ownership down payment assistance. You'll see that that was a theme that came up over and over again, was pathways for affordable housing, home ownership in the community. There was also a survey that was taken, about 280 respondents. Themes that emerged from the survey was again, a strong desire for neighborhood-oriented uses, grocery stores, community coffee shops, recreation facilities, and a strong desire for a more pedestrian-friendly walking environment with improved lighting, streetscape enhancements, wider sidewalks. And then most recently, we had a community advisory committee meeting in December. Again, we discussed with the community and shared with them some of the options that we're exploring around affordable housing, home ownership, the transitway location. We shared the various options that we've come up with. We also discussed with the community the private development on the east side of the station, the Spinnaker development that's planned and as well as built, and then also the long-term development plan for the TOD plan that we're working on. And then most recently, we had a really good virtual public meeting in January. We got a little over between 40 and 50 attendees that dialed in for that. And some of the takeaways that came out of that meeting was a number of people were acknowledging the importance of increasing density near the train station, a desire for more enhanced open space around the station, and a focus around green building design and low impact development came up. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Eric Halverson from RKG Associates, who will share the work that he's been doing around the market and economic analysis that feeds into the development of the plan itself.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Hi, everyone. Eric Halverson with RKG Associates. So, some of this will be a little bit repetitive of what Sabrina shared, so I apologize in advance, but at least I think we're in pretty close alignment with what she presented, which from the consultant standpoint is always what you want to see, which is good. So in terms of the market, Norwalk as a whole is a growing city, which is great from a market perspective. Over the last 10 years, both population and households have been increasing citywide, and actually at a faster rate than both Fairfield County and the state of Connecticut as a whole. In addition to that general growth trend, we also know from talking with developers and real estate brokers that are active here in Norwalk that the outmigration trends during COVID from some of the larger cities like New York, for example, have brought additional residents to Norwalk, particularly to locations with access to trains and transit. So as more residents start to put down roots in locations like South Norwalk, they also bring with them additional household spending, which goes to support, our local businesses, whether they be restaurants, retailers, grocery stores, et cetera. And in South Norwalk, housing is a really important driver of market demand. There are a broad range of household types in Norwalk that are sort of driving that demand, everything from young professionals to empty nesters, from single parent households to multi-generational households. The growing demand from both the sort of younger households and the older householders are really, we think, driving the need for smaller sized units too. They tend to have similar consumer preferences and the ability to pay market rents, which I think in turn are creating the strong housing supply trends that we've been seeing here in Norwalk. And citywide demand for housing is very strong. I think backed by the roughly 2,800 units that have either been approved or under construction since about 2016 in the city. Next slide, please. So looking quickly at non-residential market demand, we reviewed statistics on the office market in Norwalk and in Fairfield County. And even prior to COVID, the office demand in Norwalk had sort of been continually weakening. And in about 2020, when we had pulled this data, it's a little bit old at this point, office vacancy was nearly 29%, with a net loss of occupied space of over 400,000 square feet. And as we just saw from Sabrina's presentation, that vacancy has actually climbed. I think she mentioned as high as 38% most recently. So we also wanted to look at projected future demand for office, since that could be a potential appropriate use in this area. We looked at employment trends countywide and then basically assumed a proportion of that countywide level employment gain would help to drive office demand in Norwalk. And while Fairfield County's office occupying sectors are projected to grow, Norwalk's current office vacancies would probably accommodate a decent amount of that employment growth over time, just sort of backfilling vacancy. But we do, however, believe that there could be some opportunities for maybe some of that smaller scale office that Sabrina was mentioning, maybe occupying ground floor spaces or maybe upper story spaces in a mixed use building. Next slide, please. And then lastly, we looked at retail and restaurant space and demand. The linkage between people living and also those who visit South Norwalk from elsewhere, and also the support that they can provide to our local businesses, I think is pretty critical, particularly when you have more people living within, a comfortable walking distance to a downtown, a main street, or a retail node or retail center. The frequency of visitation for those households will usually outpace those that have to either drive in or maybe come in from a distance. So having more people living within a walkable distance to that retail center, I think is a good thing. In September of 2021, we conducted a site visit and a walking tour of both the Washington and South Main Street corridors, and just to get a sense of the retail footprint and some of the vacancies that were there on first floor spaces that we could sort of visually see as we were out there. We estimated about 20,000 square feet of vacant first floor space on our walk of those two corridors. These spaces range from something as small as maybe 1,000 square feet up to about as large as 10,000 square feet. And with the current amount of housing that's both under construction or in the approval pipeline citywide, we believe there's support for about 46,000 square feet of retail space. That may not all be brand new space. Some of it will be backfilling the vacancies that exist in the city. Some of that could be a diversification of products or offerings from existing retailers, but we do think that demand is pretty strong. This spending power from those future residents, from those new housing units, we think could help support basically backfilling some of those vacant spaces or allowing existing businesses to maybe expand their footprints in the area. Next slide. So in addition to collecting the market data, we also worked with the team to develop a financial feasibility model for testing new development scenarios in the study area. The model basically compares development and construction costs to potential revenues from that new development to basically determine if a particular development scenario, whether it makes financial sense or not. Using this model, we can then test different size developments, different mixes of uses, and also other parameters such as housing affordability or parking costs. The goal of this analysis was really to determine if there were any financial challenges with different development scenarios that we were testing. From that, our main takeaways from that analysis really included that projects under the current zoning that do include the 10% affordable housing set aside that's required for the city, are basically financially feasible. As you're seeing on the ground today, there are a lot of projects that are moving forward. But in some cases, depending on the increases that we're seeing in construction costs. If those construction costs don't necessarily are increasing at a faster pace than maybe the revenues that are coming off the development, that could put some of those projects sort of on the cusp of financial feasibility. So when we start to make adjustments to things like rent levels, the amount of parking, or if parking is charged for, if it's free with a unit, and also land value assumptions, that could either have impacts to improve viability or not. We know that one of the challenges out there is around construction costs. Materials and labor have risen substantially in the last 2 years, which may make it a bit more challenging when we're trying to adjust some of those other levers around like increasing housing affordability or dealing with additional parking above and beyond maybe what the zoning actually calls for. I always say that just because we find a gap in financial feasibility, it doesn't necessarily mean that the development either should or will cease. There are gap financing measures that are out there and creative partnerships that can actually help move those projects forward, especially those that are beneficial to both the neighborhood and the city. And last slide. So we also recognized, I think as Ken alluded to earlier, that through our discussions with the community, really just how important the concept of affordable housing and even more so affordable home ownership options are to the community. So we looked into some potential models that could maybe be applied to this area and kind of came away with 3 potential options for the delivery of affordable ownership units. And these are kind of in the order of what we think may be implemented sort of short term and heading toward longer term. So in terms of the first option, it's very similar to what the city has in place now, which is inclusionary zoning and deed restricting units at affordable purchase prices. So through inclusionary zoning, basically the city mandates that a certain percentage of those units as part of the new development would have their sales, or if it's a rental property, have their rent rates restricted to an affordable housing price that's typically set by the area median income. The city has that zoning in place that regulates both rental and ownership development today, and it mandates that 10% of all those units in a new development be made available to households earning 60% of the area median income or below. Some cities around the country, though, have actually coupled inclusionary zoning and affordable ownership with a down payment assistance program. Often one of the more challenging barriers to low to moderate income households is really in purchasing a home is really being able to save up enough money for that down payment. So this could be one potential way of removing that obstacle. The second opportunity would be to look at the feasibility of establishing a community land trust. This could be an organization. It's typically a nonprofit or a community-based entity that would enter into a purchase agreement for the land and the building or buildings that might occupy that land, if that's the case. Usually this model is most effective for kind of lower scale housing options like single family or townhouse developments. The land itself is usually owned by an entity, but the units themselves are owned by individuals, which helps reduce the cost by not having to purchase the land along with the unit. When the owners of the units want to sell, the sale price is often capped so that some of the equity in price appreciation can be realized by the seller, but the new sale price is not necessarily above what current affordable housing price points are in the market at that time. And then the third opportunity is one, I think that was very popular in the 70s and 80s called housing cooperatives, particularly limited equity housing co-ops. And this is basically a communal form of home ownership, typically in larger scale buildings with condo units. The limited equity partnership could potentially offer affordable purchase prices, essentially in return for a lower share of profit should the unit or the building itself be sold off in the future. Members of the co-op own the building via shares, and then payments are made for that share. There's also payments for a maintenance fund and also like a capital reserve fund sometimes. As shares or units are sold, then they must be also sold off at an affordable price to that next household. So just a couple of options that are out there. There are more, but these were kind of the 3 most popular ones and ones we thought maybe might be worth considering here.
And maybe what we'll do, Brian, now is before moving on to the transitway locations is pause and take any questions relative to Eric's market affordable housing presentation, or any comments, questions on the material that I presented on the community input and project overview. We're sort of
Yeah.
like halfway into our presentation now.
And anyone from the redevelopment or the planning committee, feel free to ask your questions. I can't see you all on the screen, so please just speak up if you have any questions.
Darlene may have raised her hand. Sorry, did you have something, Darlene?
You know, I did raise my hand, but I was thinking maybe I would wait to the end. But I just want to say, as someone who was a part of the committee, I just want to say up front, thank you so much for all the work that you've done, and you really did a really great job with the community meetings. And so I think you gleaned a lot of information from that, and even with the redevelopment agency. But I'll go on a little later after this is all over, because I'll probably have something else to say. But you know, the last three options that you showed about affordable housing, I think you know, one in particular doesn't work the best for home ownership in my mind. And I think I shared that at one of the meetings. But if there are other options too, I think it's worth exploring those options, because a lot of times affordable housing really isn't a leg up for folks. It can sometimes be a barrier and something that keeps you stuck. And I'm just putting it out there because I know I did before. So if there are other options, I think that we should definitely be looking into those. And the other thing with this plan, and I know that it was talked about quite a bit, is parking. Parking is a huge issue in South Norwalk, and I'm sure in other locations across the city. And I think that that's something that we as a city, as we move forward with this, have to really pay attention to. South Norwalk is one of the oldest parts of the city, and the roads reflect that. The street size and the sidewalks reflect that. They're very narrow. There's nowhere to park, and it's a densely populated area already. And with the development of all these apartments, I think by the time it's all said and done, we'll probably have close to 800 units with not enough adequate parking. So I really hope that we take that into consideration quite a bit. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that comment, Darlene, and thanks, Eric, for the earlier presentation. So we've talked about how the opportunity presented, this endeavor is really unique for South Norwalk to develop the train station area in a responsible manner while also addressing community needs. And another aspect of that is addressing transit infrastructure and improving transit connections. So we've explored a number of locations for a transit way. And we'll walk through those options momentarily. And before we do so, I'd like to add that on balance, any improvements to transit access or the bus system or pedestrian and bicycle modes and improving streetscape collectively, that can really contribute to a better South Norwalk for everyone. So here you can see the station layout and the transit elements at the station. I think a lot of us are familiar with it. We have a bus drop off and pickup on the east side of the station, surface parking lot also on the east. And within that, there's some space for bus staging. On the west side, you can see the garage access points. There's a taxi staging area, as well as some SNU customer parking. So this slide covers characteristics that are really focused on the integrated nature of the transit hub. I won't go through all of these, but really we're focusing on minimal walking distances between connecting services. In this instance, we're talking about really improving physical connection between the bus and rail, and also having a facility with good branding and wayfinding. And it's also important to note that this plan really, as Brian, I think, mentioned at the beginning, we're really balancing land use, community needs, etc. So these characteristics are purely from a transit perspective. Okay. So here's a mix of the public bus and public shuttles serving the station. We have 3 buses, 6 shuttles. The headways are generally ranging between 20 and 40 minutes. And the shuttles are primarily focused on serving the AM and PM peak periods.
I'm sorry, what's headway?
Headways are kind of when the buses come to meet at the stop. So like sort of every 20 minutes during the peak hour or so.
Essentially the frequency.
The frequency, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that. And here is some pre-pandemic ridership data that we obtained from the Norwalk Transit District. And on average, there are about 2,100 riders that are boarding and alighting, either getting on or getting off at the station on an average weekday. And at the station, the high numbers, we have almost 800 riders using the Wheels 11 from the station, and 540 on the Merit 7 shuttle. So as part of this assessment, we looked at what we would need in terms of the number of slots for the bus bays. I'll walk you through that right now. So in the 7 to 8 a.m. hour, we need a minimum of 5 to 6 slots based on the number of buses that are traveling through to this train station. But in the 8 a.m. hour, there's a need for 8 slots. And this is generally based on 4 shuttles, the Merit 7 shuttle, the Westport shuttle, the Norwalk Hospital, and the NCC commuter shuttle, which are scheduled to meet up with trains, specifically the New Haven bound 804 and 837, and the New York bound 803 and 833. But even within this period, in the gray shading, you can see these empty areas. These represent substantial periods during the hour, 15 and 20 minute blocks where many bays would be unoccupied. And I'd also note that many of the shuttles that are scheduled to provide AM and PM peak service to sync up with the peak rail service. So throughout the day, there would be large spans where less buses, less bays would be needed. There'd be more bays that would be unoccupied. So generally speaking, we want to look at or plan for the most intense period of use, so that each vehicle had a physical slot in case of an externality like a breakdown or a delay, and also to allow for some amount of future growth should the ridership warrant it. Now we'll go through a few of the transit way options. So this first option is a transit way on the west side of the station. Benefits to this concept would include a seamless rail bus connection, good bus flow, between MLK Drive and the transitway, and the ability for bus operators to have access to layover facilities. One of the concerns we heard about a transitway on this side of the station was from the community was related to air quality emissions, and we certainly recognize this, but we also feel this is a little bit more of a short-term issue, as it's important to keep in mind that this whole plan is a number of years out, and bus technology is changing so quickly these days. At some point in the near future, the district's bus fleet will be an all-electric fleet. So we won't have these issues related to emissions. So that's a really good thing. The most significant challenge with this concept is that it requires the relocation of SNU off their existing site. And because of that, we looked at opportunities for a phased implementation. We kind of wanted to see what would happen in an interim condition if we use the existing roadway on the west side of the station. So the concept laid out here, you get some of the benefits of that first concept, but in a more limited manner. And the east side of the station, you can see from the graphic, we would use for kiss and ride, passenger drop off, taxi pickups, TNC, Ubers and Lyfts, and so on. One drawback we did hear at the TAC meeting was the loss of some dedicated SNU customer parking. So people stopping, which is right in front, which currently is right here. So people stopping at the office would no longer be able to park if this was like fully utilized. So that is an additional consideration. Our next option is along MLK Drive, and this was derived directly from the community, from our walking tour, and to see what would happen if we pushed the busway further west, a little bit more distant from the existing development. So benefits to this concept are it does free up land around the station for other potential uses or additional plaza or green space. And really a good benefit of this is it doesn't require a property decision with SNU. But from an intermodal perspective, there are a lot of challenges with this concept. You don't really get that seamless connection between rail and bus. Passengers getting off on MLK would have to walk 500 to 600 feet to the station. There is more distance to be covered. This would also require the removal of one traffic lane in each direction on MLK in this area, as well as a little bit of a land acquisition to accommodate a sidewalk on the far side of MLK. So our last option we looked at was utilizing the east side of the station. It's really similar today for the transitway, and this really offers passenger familiarity. There's good station access. We did coordinate this. We had a few meetings with Spinnaker to make sure this concept did not preclude their 1517 Chestnut development and vice versa. So that was coordinated as well. So here it's really a planner screening looking at the three options with different considerations ranging from location to environmental, the ability to implement. The west and east sides score well. Really our recommendation is in the near term to utilize the east side of the station for the transitway in an interim measure. And longer term, once SNU and the Housing Authority are relocated, our recommendation would be to build out the west side of the station for the transitway. We think this would offer the long-term opportunity to develop South Norwalk Station into a really well-integrated transit facility. So as I mentioned, the near term, we're going on the east side, and the west side would be the longer term, and benefits to that, include the fact that the transit district, if there was a facility like this, could really account for the transit way. Should they plan for a bus network redesign to improve their system? There are reduced operating costs. Sometimes with a dedicated facility, it offers the ability to better time buses, to optimize transfers to other buses or rail, and layover times when buses are not in operation can be more prescribed. And the last thing I'll mention is that, if the west side is implemented, the east side can really be used for passenger pickoff and drop off, and more bicycle focused with pedestrian infrastructure, because that side of the station really has a natural connection to other areas of South Norwalk, and that can also be utilized. So that's really the concepts that we've looked at for the transitway, and now we'll walk through the development concepts. Ken, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So the development concepts, we've come up with a sort of a two-phase, phase one and phase two. Phase one is plus or minus 5 to 7 years, the next 5 to 7 years, and it focuses on the east side of the station, using, as Michael highlighted, the focus would be using the east side of the station railroad place for the transitway, as shown in the in that brown color, rust color, and then the development east of the train station is on privately owned land that has been either approved or is in the approval process, and that's identified in the gray buildings in the upper right-hand corner of the site. So that's the next 5 to 7 years, and it's really focusing on the east side of the tracks. If you go to the next slide, phase two is the west side, and that's where, shown in yellow, is the future development on the Housing Authority and SNU site. The existing zoning in the South Norwalk Special Design District allows for buildings up to 6 stories under existing zoning, and our future build out under existing zoning is about 440 residential units under existing zoning, with an additional 13,000 square feet of administrative space for the Housing Authority and 13,000 square feet of ground floor retail space. And then as part of that would be plaza and outdoor space that would be integrated into the transitway and the new development that's highlighted in the pink color. And then the west side transitway, as Michael had shown previously, is highlighted between the new development and the parking garage itself. We also explored a higher density option, which would increase an increased density option, which would go up to about 10 stories in building height, which would accommodate upwards of 700 units of housing. So between 440 housing units under existing zoning and an increased density option of 700 units is shown on the plan. As mentioned, development on the west side to accommodate both the future development as well as the transitway is contingent upon the relocation of SNU. And we have been working and have had discussions with SNU to at least preliminarily identify the criteria that should be applied for identifying potential sites. And that included a minimum of 1 acre that they're going to need of land area to accommodate their program needs. Also getting a clear understanding from them around their access requirements, and making sure that any potential site is not within the flood zone. We explored and have been exploring sites both within or adjacent to the second taxing district. And that will be at least the identification of the program needs will be outlined and recommended in our report. So I think the last piece of our presentation, if we go to the next slide, is I'm going to turn it over to Joe Bauskas, transportation engineer from VHB, who will sort of walk you through what this all means from a transportation infrastructure perspective.
Thanks, Ken. Good evening, everyone. I know we're running a little late here, so I'll try and skip through the slides. On the transportation mobility that we've talked about, the site has some great connections in Sono, and we've identified some of them here on the plan here with Washington Street Bridge and East Norwalk, with MLK Drive, obviously 95, and the surrounding neighborhoods. We have a great street network that leads to the station, so we have great connections within the study area for the TOD. Next. Also with that, we have a sidewalk network. And these are some excerpts from previous studies that were done in the city, showing an extensive network of sidewalks leading around the Sono area into the train station. There are some sections that need replaced that have been identified in previous studies, and some minor gaps under some underpasses. But for the most part, we have a pretty good network of sidewalks in the study area. Next. And also in terms of bicycle. So there's planned bike routes being investigated now along the Norwalk River. There's also on-street bike routes that are in the area. We have some limited bike lanes on Monroe Street and Washington Street and Water Street, and some proposed ones as well. So the intent is eventually connect those to the Norwalk River Trail across the bridge when that comes to fruition. So we have not extensive amount of bike networks, but we have lanes in the area that we can work with in terms of providing that mobility from the train station to other bike routes. Next. And in parking, Darlene mentioned something about parking in the beginning of the presentation. So there was a previous inventory done for the facilities in the area. We reviewed that analysis, including the Webster lot, including the Sono train station and the East lot. There's some additional studies being done. We're doing some additional studies of the parking lot themselves in terms of utilization and overnight utilization of the parking lots. And that involves a shared parking analysis. But I do want to talk about in terms of parking. What we're seeing in most of the urban communities that we've been working with is trying to minimize parking. And with this project being located next to a train station, we're certainly expecting the parking demand to be less than you would typically find in a suburban area. So in terms of parking, we're looking to see where is there available parking, where can we share parking, at the same time, where can parking be minimized, because it is a TOD project. Next. So we also looked at the intersections, the roadways themselves, as I mentioned, that's outlined here, and also the intersections. We've built a lot of traffic models based upon the Walk Bridge projects that everyone is aware. We have some additional intersections we added to the study. We also looked at other projects being planned that Michael identified in the study area. So we have a whole traffic model, this whole entire area that we looked at in terms of existing conditions, as well as projecting our traffic from the developments that are being planned and being approved on Chestnut and Monroe, as well as the development plan that Michael showed you, Ken showed you in terms of what can be done actually on the train station site. And using all that data, we developed an extensive traffic model to expand upon that and look at how these intersections will operate from a vehicle standpoint, from a pedestrian standpoint, from a bicycle standpoint. Next. So those developments I'm talking about are highlighted here. Obviously, the TOD developments on the west side of the train station, the Monroe Street development, the Spinnaker development that was talked about, and also the platform. So these were all incorporated into the traffic models that were developed for this project, and allow us to develop a background traffic model, and then from there a future traffic model with the train station development, the TOD. And all the units are identified here, as you see here. So using that development, those developments, we developed traffic generation for vehicles and persons as well, using the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual, 11th edition, came out in just last year. And we generate traffic for all the developments. We're also reviewed the traffic studies for the other developments that are being planned. And what we're looking at in total, basically, when we include the train station development, about 2,000 daily trips from those developments from the TOD, a couple hundred from in the peak hour, and about 100 in the afternoon peak hour. 230 in the morning, afternoon peak hours, and about 100 people we estimate walking or biking or using transit. So the intent here of this development is that we're not going to have your typical traffic being generated from the suburban area. We're going to have traffic that's going to be using different modes, using cars to go to the highway, walking, biking, as well as using the train station. So we distribute that traffic from the train station, with the person trips to MLK Drive, to points north, and Sono itself, and points to East Norwalk, as well as some local traffic to the south. Next. And just to focus on a few intersections, there you go. A few critical intersections in terms of level of service. And level of service is a gradation of intersection operations and capacity, A being the best, F being the worst, as you may have heard that in previous studies. And from our analysis, we didn't really find any congested intersections that were level service E or F. We found mostly pretty good operating intersections in the morning peak hour. South Main Street, Monroe Street is a level service C. Chestnut and Monroe is a level service B. And there's some traffic being generated there. But for the most part, we've got acceptable operations in the morning peak hour. I think also, Mike, next slide, in the afternoon peak hour. So yeah, there you go. So again, and obviously South Main Monroe is a busy intersection. So that's where we're seeing the lower level service and operation at that intersection. So then we took these intersections and these traffic models, we added the traffic being projected by the other traffic studies, as well as our own traffic. And we put that into a future condition and gave us a morning peak hour. And you can see here some changes here. Obviously, you add the traffic into the future, you see some reductions in level service. We're able to also do some improvements with some retiming of the signals. But you see here, like with Chestnut Monroe, that's unsignalized intersection. There's a lot of development going on there. So that operation is going to go down to level service D. Now that's because that's trying to get out of Chestnut, trying to leave Chestnut. So it doesn't really affect Monroe, but it's really the traffic exiting Chestnut that's going to see a reduction in level service. Not a level service E or F, which is congested, but level service D, which is acceptable level service. So that's one thing we identified in the morning peak hour, afternoon peak hour, Mike. So same thing in the afternoon peak hour. Again, that's a result of the heavier traffic flow on Chestnut Street from those developments. And not as much traffic from our development on the train station side, because most of that traffic is going to use MLK Drive in Monroe. It won't be affected by that. But this is something we see with the inclusion of all the developments in the area, some reduction level service. Now, is that terrible? No, it's a reduction level service, yes. But level service D is an acceptable operation. And it's a function of how much time it will take you to turn out of Chestnut Street onto Monroe. That's really the level service. The Monroe Street approach is not really affected. Next. So what does this all mean in terms of our analysis that we've done? We have excellent access to the train station and the surrounding neighborhoods. We have a supportive infrastructure that I've talked about. We have city collector roads and arterial roadways that provide access to the train station. We have some moderate peak hour traffic volumes and daily volumes. And let me be clear, this is all based upon pre-pandemic. We're not using pandemic level volumes now. Pre-pandemic volumes are used here. Although we are seeing in many locations in Connecticut, pandemic volumes are very close to pre-pandemic conditions. I didn't talk about crashes before. We haven't really found any location in the study area that had any unusual crash patterns that need to be addressed. Typical crash patterns, angle crashes at some signalized intersections, but nothing that's unusual, saying we need to look at that before we add some traffic to it. So as I mentioned, level service looks very good in terms of level service D or better. We did see some reductions, but nothing significant in terms of operations. And so in terms of mitigation, we talk about some of the streetscape improvements that we're proposing. but we're looking at mostly doing some minor traffic signal timing changes to the signals on MLK Drive, Monroe, South Main and Monroe as well. So that's what we're kind of looking at. We didn't see a need to do any major improvements to address the traffic. We have a good network there, distributed pretty well, and it's a TOD where a lot of residents are going to use the train station to get to work. I think that's what I have. Mike, right, is the last one.
Thanks, Joe. And then I think we just have one final slide. And thank you all for your patience. I know we've thrown a lot at you. So we're at the sort of final lap of our work. We're in the midst of finalizing and preparing a final draft of the plan, and we'll be releasing that plan in the next several weeks to obtain public comment, and then we'll be finalizing the work. So I think that concludes our presentation. Brian, I'll turn it back to you. And again, thank you for your patience. I know you've between the earlier presentation and our presentation, we've buried you with about 100 slides. So thank you for sitting through it all.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, and as Ken mentioned, we really want to just kind of provide a comprehensive overview of the work, where we're at, obviously wrapping it up, so you got a good idea of kind of where the plan and the report is heading. A lot of this is focused on implementation. We have the city's POCD, we have the South Norwalk TOD redevelopment plan. So we just wanted to obtain your comments before we start going into the final drafting of the plan. Just thoughts, concerns, and anything that you heard tonight.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, guys. Any questions from either redevelopment or the planning committee?
Just one question. Brian, could you send out copies of this so we can just read it separately?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I had a question. Is there any way to calculate about, if we're looking at it very simplistically, about what overall traffic is going to look like in Norwalk? I guess I would focus the question in two ways. Are we talking in terms of the overall project? How much are we talking about cutting traffic for inflows of people coming to work? And how much are we talking about decreasing flow of traffic of people commuting out? And then overall, because we're also increasing density, how much is this going to cut into increased traffic with the new development? I mean, they may not be questions we can answer, but I'm sort of wondering, grosso modo, how we're envisioning what this looks like in terms of how we're expecting this to affect traffic patterns.
If you don't mind, before you answer, stop sharing your screen so everyone can see one another. That'd be very helpful. Thank you.
So I guess I can take a stab at it. So in terms of cutting traffic, so the new development is going to increase traffic. We're going to add traffic. So I think that maybe the response to that question is we're not going to increase traffic as much because it's next to a train station. So maybe that's the way to answer the question, is that we can look at this development being proposed in a suburban area of Connecticut, or even a rural area of Connecticut, where you have no access to other modes. It's just car traffic. And we can provide a summary of what that would mean there versus what this is generating next to a train station. So there's definitely reduction. Depending where you are in the country, we've seen TODs from 30% to 50% reduction in traffic from a normal location because of the access to the different modes between the trains and buses. So we've seen that. Various studies have identified that. Connecticut DOT allows us to use 20%. The State Traffic Administration, they're very conservative. They only allow 20%, but we know other TOD studies have shown reductions on the order of 30% up to 50% from a typical a location that's not adjacent to transit.
I think if I could just add to, Joe, if I could just add to, in terms of the comment of increasing traffic, I mean, the devil's sort of in the details and something like that. So taking a look at the type of development that's being proposed right around the train station is a lot of residential. So the peak hour trips are actually relatively minimal when compared to something like an office, right? As you mentioned, commuting to their jobs or work or commercial areas. So we're looking to minimize and mitigate that through the recommendations in the plan that Joe had previously presented.
And are there any projections of more impact in one direction or the other? I'm just curious in terms of incoming or outgoing.
That was that LOS analysis that Joe had presented at the end there, but we could provide a more detailed outbreak of that. It'll be included in the report.
Yeah, because I mean, I think Darlene was right that it's going to be parking, but there will also be pushback over time in terms of traffic patterns. So having an understanding of what that might look like, but the benefits that we're getting, I think will be really important to articulate.
Thank you. And Mary, and to your question and point, I would definitely like to get that information, because part of the development and the design, particularly with Spinnaker, has widened parts of the sidewalk, which is trying to control traffic flow. And I think I've asked this question before. I think there are going to be opportunities or suggestions of making some of those streets one way. And this TOD project, along with Spinnaker, is it right in the middle of a school? And we also have industrial businesses that utilize the same pathways and corridors and streets. And so at some point, there is going to have to be some sort of traffic study, because we have, streets off of South Main that are one way. So the access is very limited and very trying when you're talking about tractor trailer trucks or dump trucks, any type of those vehicles coming up and down the street and utilizing the area. And so traffic will then be deferred to other areas. Martin Luther King might get heavier, or Water Street might get heavier, or South Norwalk uses might get heavier. So there is a real need for that. And I'm very curious to know what Spinnaker's design looks like, because right now at the corner of Monroe and Chestnut is awful. And even there should only be one side of the street is supposed to be parking. So you're eliminating, parking with this development, with a lot of the development going on. So I'd like to hear more about that.
And so, just addressing the one thing in terms of what we're doing, obviously we try to model it at the worst case scenario. So that's kind of what those LOS numbers that you were kind of seeing is if we looked at a full build out with additional density and sort of those intersection improvements that we identified to accommodate that, obviously needing further analysis once you get to the project level, once we have actually something in front of us from a developer. But concurrent to all this, we've identified these, mitigation strategies and projects, but we're aggressively pursuing funding to make sure that we minimize the impact of the area as we've discussed. So the $6 million grant that we pursued from our DCD to support a $12 million project that you all approved sort of at the last, through the match finance committee process. And then also the RAISE grant. So we're actually going to be resubmitting for that as well. It's due in April for a $12 million assistance package to address all the parking, the transportation mitigation recommendations of this plan. So it's in the forefront of our minds. We don't want to create development while overburdening the area from an infrastructure perspective.
And Darlene, I might mention regarding Joe's traffic effort, he looked at the worst case, the highest density in terms of residential units, 700 units. So, and that's our increased density scenario. So, that's sort of our planning for the worst case. So the traffic may even be, less, in terms of LOS.
I think so. And I know the one-way streets are coming. I just would like to hear about it well before it's on its way.
I'm gonna phone a friend. I'm gonna phone a friend here, Jim Travers. I know he's looking at the traffic to the south with the commercial development that you've been talking about. I know Jim's, and I'm not putting in a spot, but I know you've been looking at it. So I'll phone a friend.
So yeah, so I'll just chime in for a second, and I'm here for another item. But Councilperson Young, I think I share your concerns. We've had the conversation. We have not gotten a response. We continue to work with the team at Spinnaker to talk about what the future Chestnut would look like. What would the existing roadway look like? And I think this is what we should be doing for every development, right? I think that we have an opportunity to get it right. And we have, and sometimes getting it right is maybe changing things a little bit. That's going to be a little different. I can tell you that I spent a considerable amount of time with Brian. I have a lot of respect for the team over there. It brings me in early on. I think we're in a better position now. We have a really formalized traffic department, right? And and we're speaking for the residents. So we will continue to be in touch with you about what that future looks like. We will be in touch with you when we get the final analysis done. And I think we'll be in touch with the community about what those final recommendations are. But I think Chestnut is one in particular that it's a challenging street. The width of the street varies block to block. It's not your typical street, and I think we have an opportunity to make it better. And my commitment here is I'll continue to work with Brian and all the developers that come through and for really take an in-depth look and also. We are advancing the use of technology that we have. So we, I don't know if you were aware that we recently been awarded a $3.4 million grant that we applied for earlier last year now. And that's going to introduce more adaptive signals. So our signals are going to be smarter. We've worked with the technology with the implementation of the mall, and we continue to fine tune it with that, but seeing some really great results, and we're going to expand that to other signals throughout the city, as well as giving prioritization for bus transit. So the buses will be able to get longer green time or shorter red time. So we'll have a prioritization for them. So we're looking at innovative ways to continue to move traffic around and make sure that you have a responsive traffic signal system.
So lastly, I just want to say thank you all for all the work you've done in this report. As I said earlier, you guys did an excellent job engaging District B, and I know just from being a part of that they were very pleased and felt heard. So I appreciate that, and look forward to this final report and what happens. Well, this is it. This is it. So
we'll bring the actual report to you so you have time to take a look at it. And
take a look at it.
Yeah.
So thank you all.
Thank you. And I appreciate all your involvement and the time you spent tonight going over this. But this is a year of work, so there's a lot to go through. But can't thank you enough for your support of all this.
Thank you, Brian.
Are there any other questions from the group before we move on? No. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, the members of the Redevelopment Commission that gave up a night for us and for this. And thank you, members of the Planning Committee, and for your time as well. And I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this in the coming months. Okay. Moving on to the last item on the agenda, and that is late edition. There was some I was told it was a little time sensitive, so Mr. Travers has brought item D1 to us, which is authorize Mayor Harry W. Rilling to amend the agreement between the City of Norwalk and Fuss and O'Neill for design services for the Wall Street Corridor Improvement Project number 4149 for an amendment amount of $49,500 with the revised total agreement amount not to exceed $399,500. And the account number is noted. Would someone like to move this item? Thank you, Tom. Mr. Livingston. Mr. Travers, can you tell us a little bit more about this, please?
Yes, sir. So first off, Councilperson Kaides, thank you for the last minute, allowing the last minute entry. We were able to move this through the purchasing department at the end of last week, and thank you for allowing me to put it on the agenda. Joining me here is Garrett. Garrett's going to be project managing this as we go through, but I won't take too much of your time. I have a 72-page presentation to do, and I'll try to get through it in the next 4 or 5 hours, if it's okay.
So you don't want approval?
I will press end meeting right now. Right this second.
We're really excited, about this. So, we've been in front of you guys before for, the approval of the Fuss and O'Neill contract for really reimagining Wall Street and what it's going to be working through that design. And in that process, there was a prior grant that DPW had awarded a lots of application for the 2-block section between Brook and Main of East Wall Street that we felt very passionately about that really should be included in the larger vision of what we're looking at in Wall Street. And we knew that from our preliminary design and from our preliminary review of the corridor, that we had an opportunity to get bike lanes in, that we really had, we heard from the community, bike lanes, we heard from the community, walkability, we heard from the community, as we knocked on the door, the sidewalks. So we really wanted to make sure that this block really also contained the same elements, of the corridor. So there was some preliminary work done by DPW. We're going to advance that design, changing some of the scopes to coalesce better with what we are envisioning for the rest of the corridor. And we were able to secure that grant. So the grant is still in play. The reason that, we asked to come on ahead of time here is because we really feel that if we can get this through you and through the council, get it awarded, we can wrap up the design by the summer, be out to bid for construction work by the end of the summer, and really start letting the people know that we're no longer talking about doing plans on Wall Street, that we're actually going to start building a new Wall Street. We're really excited. We've knocked on the doors of many of the businesses down there to talk to them about what the plans are. So we've heard from the community, and we've had full support for everything that we've done so far. And we are in front of the Wall Street Neighborhood Association on the 29th to talk about the project, the larger project, and really launching that. And then, we continue to write a grant and got some preliminary approval comments for one grant. We haven't heard of the other one yet. And we are working with the state of Connecticut on a potential appropriation to be able to start even the intersection improvements. So we're very excited because we're 1000% committed to making this happen. And so what is in front of you today is really just moving. We're going to do a slight moving of funds, really securing a $1.5 million grant that allow us to start to build that, but making sure that the design is cohesive throughout all of the corridor. So happy to answer any questions either you have for either Garrett or I.
Sorry, Barbara.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman Cuddies. Thanks very much, Jim. I'm just wondering, when might we see some potential design about what's planned?
Okay, so we have some concepts. Garrett, do you have that?
Yeah.
So
if you wouldn't mind.
So if we can get
I'm happy to share my
share his screen. We can walk you through a couple of things, and this is higher level and kind of the guidance that we're looking to give to the consultant to move forward. I think.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Let me just zoom in.
All right, so could you just zoom in a little bit, Garrett, so that they can see? This is going to be a little hard to see. So. Apologize for the rough. So this is kind of like engineering at its best, right? So this is, what we did in CAD, so computer aided drafting here. So if you could shift it over to a little bit to Brook Street. Perfect.
Forgive me, it's a little slow. I'm connected remotely. Here we go.
So you'll see, so the area that's in pink is really indicative of what we're seeing as the new curb line, right? So what we're seeing here is consistent travel lanes that are going to be consistent through the corridor. You'll have a 5-foot bi-directional bike lane, so 5-foot bike lane that is in each of the directions of the road, right? You'll see on the bottom where the number 8 is over there. That's indicating like there's going to be bulb outs. It's going to kind of protect the parking and give a little bit more tightening of the road, helping to control the speed. You'll see opposite of IE10 where the design advances more of a plaza that's going there, pull that out. And then we very much heard from the community early on, from DPW's comments, heard from the community, a desire to have a mid-block crosswalk. We're moving the crosswalk, which was a little bit more to the east. We're moving it to connect to that island because we think it's a better placement of the crosswalk, and really in line with a little bit more of the parking. So those bulb outs are going to be indicative that you're going to see through the corridor. Those are the consistent things that they have. But that is, this is the kind of rough part of the design that we're running with, right? So you see, we're expanding the sidewalks wherever we can. We're bringing the consistency, but more so, we're really bringing consistency in the road network. So we believe through a better design that we're actually going to be able to control speeds, because that's one of the things that we hear from the people at Wall Street a lot, right? Is that the speed of vehicles that are going down there, and looking at things that we can do, and then in conversations that I've had, is the speed of those vehicles are doing exactly what we designed them to do, because the road has been designed in a switch way that it's really wide in some parts, and the reason that you're comfortable driving on the highway is because how they built the highway. And so we're really looking at this as building a village type road really close. You'll see all of those. Now, this is the schematics of where the curb is going to go, but I also want you to imagine here that we'll have a corridor filled with no longer the big Cobra lights, but more pedestrian level lights that go down, keeping the light down to a better height. There'll be introduction of street trees through the corridor here as well, and really just trying to create that village flair. But I can go through anything else that you want to chat about.
Hey, Jim, David Huvelman, a quick question. The crosswalk, I know at one time they were talking about those being those raised crosswalks. Is that the same idea?
So we're looking at, so we're still looking at a raised crosswalk. We're also looking at how we introduce a little whimsy throughout the corridor that we're hearing, so we want to make something that's going to be very uniquely Norwalk here, that really is going to speak to the arts community that's here. So we know that we want to work with the community to not only create that raised crosswalk, but also the crosswalks on Knight and High Street, and how they could have a little bit more of a flair, which we think all these things together will help control speeds, will create that space that the pedestrian is very comfortable, but we also have a really connected bike network here. I should
on the west side there, where you've got the crosswalk that where Wall and Main intersect. Are we going to finish that out and put the crosswalk on the other side as well? So all three sides.
Yes. So that was an in-house project taken up by DPW. It was one of the first things that I talked to them about. Like, it was really a change of design. Our design prior design before was really just putting two legs of a crosswalk on, and so we've asked, we've changed the model that for the city to have the pedestrian ability to cross all legs of an intersection, and we've already put that request in there to have that one done as well. So it's not showing on here, but yes, you're right. This was just a rough sketch to kind of that's actually out of the project area for here. It will be incorporated into the larger we'll see it in the larger project when we design that one. But yes, you'll have the crossing there as well.
Great, thank you.
I just have a follow-up question. With the plaza there coming out off of AHI 10, will you be limiting or making some kind of change? People come down High Street. I'm guilty of this myself. Coming down High Street, swooping around, and then trying to go up Knight Street, which is a little hazardous. Are you looking at addressing that and stopping people like me from doing that?
So we think that we think that by pulling out that island, it's not going to be as comfortable for you to do it, right? Because I have been in AHI where I sit there and see cars facing the wrong direction, and the first time I Garrett and I were out there, I was like, what is happening here, right? But I think, again, it's how we designed it. We designed it for you to feel very comfortable to be able to do that. It's not very safe, but it's comfortable. And so we really believe in pulling that island out. You know, it's no longer going to be that comfortable for you to do it. So hopefully we're going to be there. You know, we did look at, you know, potentially even reversing the direction. The challenge becomes coming out of Knight Street. You don't have sight distance because the building's so close to the corner for us to safely do that. So we want to build the island out as far as we can so that we don't make it as comfortable for you to do that. And then we'll also have that crosswalk there. So we'll have much more, I think, maybe activity that doesn't bode well to that maneuver.
Okay, thanks.
Jim, I just want to.
I got one question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Livingston. I'll go after you.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to commend you on this because, you know, I think it's so important that we have the consistency from one end to the other. If we're really going to be serious about revitalizing the Wall Street area, we're really going to show the commitment. And I think the commitment is evidenced in part by a consistent treatment that reflects all the things you've mentioned here in terms of the streetscapes, the curbing, that make it more walkable. And I think I really appreciate that. And thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. And you'll also see that, you know, on the bottom of the screen, we have where it says match line 1. We have went on and further designed what the rest of the corridor would look like up into the 5-legged intersection. And in my budget for you all to approve, you know, in this coming year, I did request funding for us to look at what that intersection could look like, because I think that needs some help too, and we need to start reimagining what that is. But you know, what we really are committed to is a consistent corridor. You know, the bike lanes will, you know, we are looking at bike lane design on the full length of West Rocks, on France, on Park. They'll come down here. You'll go on Main. So we're really looking at a, you know, much stronger connected network, which I think starts to reduce our reliance on vehicular traffic and gives us better opportunities. If we can make more walkable neighborhoods and walkable communities, I think that we're going to be a much stronger community. So you know, we're very much committed to that design.
Thank you, Jim. My question is about the bump outs. I've seen them in another community nearby, and there's some concern about trucks turning. Will we have anything that we should be concerned about larger trucks?
So we are running a truck turning template on every single one of our applications. So I hear you. You'll see these are you know, relatively you know, smaller. I think in that aspect they're really just protecting the parking, which makes it feel a little different and starts to do it. But you not only have the travel lane, but in this instance, you also have the 5 foot of the bike lane that helps you know, in that turning maneuver. But we are running a truck turning template, a software that allows us to simulate how trucks turn and maneuver. So that we look at the type of truck that goes through the corridor and make sure that it's going to be designed for that. So you know, that will be. So this is our concept. This is where we, you know, preliminary what we saw. This is what we're going to be giving to the consultant. But we will be requesting a truck turning template on the final design. So it should not be an issue.
Any other questions? Oh, Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm just so excited to see this amount of investment in the Wall Street area. This is such an important area of our city. I feel like it's been on the verge of coming about for so long, and it's really exciting to see this happening. And so I love to hear the 1,000 commitment or 1,000% commitment that Jim and Garrett have said that they're going to do. So thank you. Very exciting.
You know, thanks. And we are like that's, you know, and that is, you know, I think that, you know, in our community, you know, conversations with the community, I think that's, you know, we were having a conversation with someone today, right? You know, what we have is, well, I've been hearing about this for 20 years, right? You know, and that's been you know, I haven't been here for 20 years, but it's been a consistent story that I think that we need to change that perception for people. And I think, you know, if we can be out or at least secure the bid by this fall, and we could look at the other investments that we're going to start to, they can see a pathway forward. And I also think that we're very much committed to community engagement. I heard Councilperson Young commend the prior work done around Sono, and hopefully we'll be here and having those same comments be made, because we are firmly committed to the community really participating in what the final design looks like. So we're excited to move this one forward.
This is David Huvelman again. I just want to say thank you, Jim and Garrett. And I really appreciate the work that you guys have done since arriving here in Norwalk. And this in particular, the idea of being a cohesive unit all the way through Wall Street, from the five corners area all the way down through and up to West Avenue. And I appreciate that you guys are doing this, and that you're looking at this, and that you're looking at it as a unit. I'm very excited to see what happens going forward, and what Fuss and O'Neill comes up with, and when we get to start seeing those designs actually come to fruition. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing.
Certainly, we'll certainly
appreciate it. And I think we wanted to mention too that what's before you is really phase one. This will be the first construction element of the project, and we have the larger design for the Wall Street area, but we also have another partner, which is the Parking Authority. And at the last Parking Authority meeting, we brought forth some proposed improvements to the Yankee Doodle garage to really update it and to bring it to the 21st century, some aesthetic improvements, some functionality improvements, because we know we're going to look at converting Burnell Boulevard to a two-way roadway, and we're going to really improve access. So the Parking Authority is starting to look at some investments to make a much better garage and improve connectivity to the area, improve parking conditions for people coming downtown. And we foresee that a project that will happen in the midterm after this phase one of the project.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I would also like to thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Jim, for all this hard work. It's good to see this ball rolling, and hopefully that saying, build it and they will come, holds true. If there are no other questions, I will now call for a vote. All in favor, please raise your hand to signify yes. And that would make it unanimous. Great. Thank you, everyone. And thank you all for the time. I know we had a jam-packed meeting. We've been on the call for 2.5 hours, but we got a lot done, I feel, and that's always a good thing. So if there's no other questions, I will now ask for a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Smith. All in favor? Great. Have a great night.
Darlene has something.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
What?
No, I'm sorry. I was saying no.
Oh, you want to do some more meeting?
Yes, I do. So I just, no, what? Oh, Jim and Garrett, good night.
All right, good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Good night. I'm sorry.